Keeping Quiet by Pablo Neruda. Now we will count to 12 and we will all keep still for once on the face of the earth. Let's not speak in any language. Let's stop for a second and not move our arms so much. Keeping Quiet by Pablo Neruda. A Spanish poet. Spanish I call him because he writes in the Spanish language. So we are looking at Spanish poetry coming out of Chile. Chile, as you know, is a country in South America. We are looking at a poem in translation, and therefore it's interesting to see what actually happens. So remember, we are looking at Keeping Quiet by Pablo Neruda, written in Spanish and translated into English. Keeping Quiet by Pablo Neruda, a poet, politician, diplomat from Chile. He was influenced by the political actions, activities, happenings of the period. By some, he has even been called a communist. He has won the Nobel Prize in Literature and seems to be somehow spurred by man's fight, need for justice. He often admits to the fact that he has been influenced by writers as different and far apart as Marquis, Whitman, and Tagore. There are very, very few translations of his poems available for us. Keeping Quiet. Now we will count to 12 and we will all keep still for once on the face of the earth. Let's not speak in any language. Let's stop. That's how this poem begins. Why is it so important to keep quiet? Neruda believes that it is very important to keep quiet because it is only keeping quiet which will give us an opportunity to look at peace and probably to understand the world around us. And why 12, you might ask? Because remember, there are 12 hours. And then also the 12 zodiac signs maybe. So the number 12 there has a great deal of importance for us. He believes that if we keep quiet, it would be an exotic moment without rush, without engines. So there would be no noise of the industries, no noise of the cars, no noise of factories. But along with that, he is also probably thinking of the sound of the cannons, of the bombs, because he lived in a period where there was war all around him. So he says, if we can keep quiet, we will be able to understand the world better. It's not just about you and me on the earth. He gives us one more example. And he says, the fisherman in the cold sea would not harm whales, and the man gathering salt would not look at his hurt hands. Look at it. There would be a cessation of continuous action, of continuous work. And then he's probably also talking about the ecological concerns that we have. If fishermen stop fishing, the whales would be happy. The whales would be free to swim. And so he goes on. There is so much work people are doing, physical, hard labor. If only we could stop that for a moment. The calloused hands probably of the workers. So he's thinking of people at all levels. And then what would happen? People who are preparing wars for wars would also probably stop. So there would be no wars, no gas. And then what will we do with that time? He says that is when we will be in the shade doing nothing. I want us to understand he's not talking about total cessation of activity. He's talking about the ceasing of activity which probably pushes us into the grind, into a rut. He wants us to stop that. And what will we do? Then there will be time for introspection. We will be in solitude, so we will get an opportunity in that tranquil, peaceful, serene atmosphere to look within ourselves. And remember, He does not want us to reach a phase of total inaction or lazing around doing nothing. We will be doing something, but that would be also looking within into a period of total peace and tranquility. In fact, introspection is the most important thing there. The theme of the poem is so interesting, and somehow it seems as if this poet, Neruda, does not find it necessary to embellish it with figures of speech, with literary terms. He's so straightforward in his description that when I read the poem, in fact, when I reread the poem, I really had to search for figures of speech. Well, there's one which is interesting, which some of you might not find in the literary terms in any book probably, and that is pun. Remember, the pun is a very interesting way, and your favorite puns might be, like the tail, the T-A-L-E and the T-A-I-L. But here the pun that I'm talking about is the use of the word arms, A-R-M-S, arms. What comes to mind when you think of arms? Depending on the context, you're probably looking at weapons, but also remember we have our own arms. So he has, when he says, not move our arms. You read the line again and look at how he is using the word with both the meanings. An example, a good example of the use of pun. There is paradox in this poem, and we wonder how can we have also action with no action. He does that when he uses the paradox again and again. Wars without fire? How can that be? Wars without, but then he's talking about the green wars, remember. He's talking of us looking at the nature, at ecology. There is also the use of personification. When he talks about speaking, he's not just talking about human beings speaking. So there is personification coming across in the poem. Very simple figures of speech. Maybe you could challenge yourself to read the poem again and see if we can find other figures of speech in this poem. Remember, we are looking at a poem in translation. Translation from Spanish into English. Interesting, because when we read in any poem in another language, we notice that it could be very different. But good for us, at least for me, I don't know Spanish, so I'm reading it only in English. But you might enjoy looking at poems translated, and if you know both the languages, what do you see? How different is it? Look at that. Also look at poems, the same poem translated more than once by more than one author. Look at poems which have been translated by the poet himself, like Rabindranath Tagore translating his Gitanjali. Interesting, because remember, as we read translations, we know more and more of other cultures. Hope you enjoyed this poem and you continue to read poems in translation. Those who prepare green wars, wars with gas, wars with fire, victories with no survivors, would put on clean clothes and walk about with their brothers in the shade, doing nothing.